In 2014, Wizards printed the card King Makar, a really fascinating commander based on King Midas. King Makar turns creatures into gold tokens, and although it's not the point of this video, but with vehicles, this commander got way better and is super underrated. Anyway, years later, Wizards R&D needs to make a token for their upcoming pirate set, Ixalan, and gold doubloons seems like a good idea. But gold tokens are quite powerful, since you don't need to tap them to generate mana. So if you put gold tokens into standard, it might prove too strong when paired alongside the improvise mechanic. Because of that, Wizards created treasure tokens for Ixalan, since they tapped and sacrificed when you wanted to make the mana. Originally a Grixis mechanic, -1 card, but after Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan, Wizards kept printing more treasure tokens, eventually making it a deciduous mechanic, meaning it's a tool that R&D can use when designing a set, but it won't likely be in every set. In terms of flavor, this kinda works. Every world would have some kind of treasure, so it makes sense that treasure tokens can appear anywhere. And appear anywhere they did. Treasure tokens showed up in Commander 2019, 2020, Double Masters, and a bunch of other sets I am not going to list off because it is a lot. Today, treasure tokens are in 5 colors and have tons of support. It allows every color to ramp and color fix, as if they're green, but they're not. Every color can make cheap tokens, which sacrifice or tap if you need them, and all of this came with a lot of power. These cards were strong. Just look at Jewel Thief, 2 keywords and ramp on 1 body. This card was the bee's knees in Pauper and still sees play today. Deadly Dispute is a crazy versatile and powerful draw spell that got banned in Pauper, and these are just the commons. Of course, we had Dockside, which I think is the poster child for busted treasure cards, but then people do forget about some of the other busted treasure cards we got. Dihada is an insane commander. So is Magda, who remains one of the best commanders in CEDH to this day. Smothering Tide, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and the recent Monument to Endurance are all very strong treasure generating cards. And back in 2022, players were starting to get sick of it. You can find tons of articles and comments about treasures. It felt like everyone was making treasures for free constantly. Wizards just tacked the effect onto so many random spells, seemingly without consideration for how this would affect the game. And I completely agree with that sentiment. I mean, I remember back then feeling like there were a lot of treasures. I think this Reddit comment I found sums it up pretty well. Generally, ramp and color fixing is something that should not be stapled onto other effects for free. It's the kind of effect that can easily push things over the edge, just like adding draw a card to an effect can suddenly take something from bad to broken. And because treasures were added everywhere, it kind of trivialized ramp and color fixing because so much of your deck just did that. Wizards heard the complaints though. Today they've sort of learned their lesson. We see a lot more cards create tapped treasure tokens, which are so much weaker than these early treasure cards that allowed you to just storm off. Although Monument to Endurance is pretty powerful and very recent, so maybe learning their lesson is a bit of a stretch. So that's kind of a little history of treasures, but where does it leave us today? I want to talk about treasure decks in current EDH. What do treasure decks look like, some tips on how to build them, and what type of player should build a treasure deck. All of that right after I remind you to subscribe. If you like these archetype breakdowns, I got a playlist for them, you can check that out. And if you want to support me directly, you can do so on my Patreon. And if you want to build a treasure deck for yourself, check out Cool Stuff Inc. If you use my code TTM at checkout, you'll get a discount and it supports the channel. Treasures offer a lot of things. It's an artifact on board, a permanent you sacrifice. It makes mana, and it's a token. All of these different ways to utilize treasures make very different decks. A treasure deck, I'm using air quotes here, is not one coherent type of deck. Unlike how an aristocrat's deck is kind of one thing, and a reanimator deck is kind of one specific thing. Treasures are in all 5 colors, but are primarily red, so I would expect most treasure decks to lean into that color. When making a treasure deck, you want to decide which part of the treasure you want to focus on. Let's start with the fact that it is an artifact that sits on the board. There are a ton of cards that care about number of artifacts in play. Master of Ethereum, Urza Lord High Artificer, or just things with improvise. Decks that use these cards will want a lot of artifacts in play, and treasures are great ways to do it, since there's so many effects that just make a couple of them here and there. You can also use them for your win condition. Playing cards like Rise and Shine will turn them into a huge army that you can attack with. Decks like this also love Academy Manufactor, specifically because they want a lot of random garbage that they can tap or animate. Cards like Reckless Fireweaver and Gear Per Aether Grid are also excellent in a list like this, allowing you to close out games or ping down creatures. Some examples of commanders that play like this would be Vahan Goldwalker or Galazeth Prismari. Both of these really benefit from just having a lot of treasures in play. Now, instead of leaving a bunch of artifacts in play, we can do the opposite and lean into the fact that this is a permanent which sacrifices itself, which opens up a separate artifact aristocrats game plan. Cards like Disciple of the Vault, Marionette Master, and Fangren Marauder give you benefits for cracking your treasures. And then you just need to use the treasure mana to make more treasures and keep the value train going. This type of deck is a common build for Korvold, but you can also go with Jury Master of the Review or something like Keskit and Tago as your commander. And then the most powerful way to build a treasure deck is probably Storm, which makes sense. They let you bank mana up, right? And a Storm deck just wants to prepare for one big crazy turn. There are a couple of ways to do this. Using cards that let you tap the treasures for mana, then allow you to untap them with other effects and retap them for more value. And then if you don't have a way to untap them, you just crack the treasure for even more mana. It lets you double or triple the effectiveness of each treasure. You can also play cards that reduce the cost of your spells. An Unexpected Windfall is a cheap way to churn through your deck, since it's effectively 2 mana, but if you reduce the cost, it's effectively 1 mana, and if you reduce the cost even further, it's effectively 0. You can also play cards that increase the number of treasures that are made. Things like Zorn are a great example of this. Additionally, copying cards that make a lot of treasures can be an insane way to make many more treasures. If you have something like a Brass's Bounty on the stack, which can make a lot of treasures, if you copy it with a 2 mana copy spell, that becomes a massive ritual. And of course, you can let the copy spell resolve, crack some of those treasures to cast another one, and get even more mana. Prosper is likely the poster child for this type of deck. If you have a good way to get cards into exile, you can easily storm off with a Prosper list, especially if you have something that is giving you extra treasures or reducing the cost of spells. There are also lots of other decks that incorporate treasures as a sub-theme. Pirates often care about treasures. Chatterfang, Ognis, and Rashmi and Ragavan also care about treasures or make treasures. While we're on the topic of sub-themes, here are a few other commanders that make excellent use of treasures. Jaretti Scrap Savant, Jaheira Friend of the Forest, and Bruticlad are all commanders that love having treasures in play. Use a few other general tips when playing treasure decks. Get a token that helps you with floating mana. A lot of times you're going to end up cracking your treasures all at once for some reason, and then floating all that mana, and you have to decide what to do with it. Having ways to track how much of each color you're floating is pretty important. It can be something as simple as just a basic land sleeved up in a different colored sleeve. It doesn't have to be anything fancy or expensive. Also, things that allow you to play at instant speed are awesome with treasures. If you have a bunch of treasures in play and you wanted more for your big play, but on your opponent's turn, they tried to sweep away your treasures, it can be a big problem. But if you can crack all those, float the mana, and flash things in at instant speed, suddenly your treasure plan becomes really difficult to interact with, because they can't use artifact sweepers to slow you down. Treasure decks are also somewhat budget friendly. Since there are a lot of things that make treasures, it is actually relatively easy to put together a deck that produces treasures. So if you're on a budget, and especially if you're going the route of putting a lot of artifacts in play, a budget treasure deck is a pretty great option. Sadly, some of the best payoffs and synergy pieces haven't been reprinted as much, and if you want those, you do have to pay a little extra, and your treasure deck can get a little expensive. So in terms of budget, I would rank treasure decks somewhere in the mid-range of price. The versatility of treasures is part of their immense power. It's really easy to add a bunch of treasure making cards to your deck, even without a lot of support, and it will still let your deck function pretty well. Unexpected Windfall lets you dig for a big finisher and ramps you into that finisher. If it's a card draw spell that makes treasures, it's now a card draw ramp spell. If it's a removal spell that makes treasures, it's now a removal and ramp spell. Ramp and color fixing is good in every deck, period. So treasure cards almost always end up being good cards in your deck. It's kind of like landfall in that way. You can play them in a deck that's not even that centered around lands, because in theory, you're probably going to play one-ish land a turn, and you always want to be playing lands. So rewarding yourself for something that's already good and beneficial is going to end up being pretty powerful. And it's the same with treasures. It's inherently good to have a lot of treasures in play. So if you get extra value for having treasures in play, it's going to feel strong. In casual EDH, I think treasures are one of the most powerful themes out there. It's genuinely hard to make a treasure deck that is bad, and it's really easy to make one that's very good. When gauging the power of your treasure deck, think of how quickly you can ramp up the treasure production and what your payoff is. If you make a lot of treasures very fast and your payoff is very strong, your deck will be very powerful. So if you're aiming for a lower bracket, either tone down the payoffs or tone down the treasure production, or both if you really want to. I think one of the easiest things to do is skip out on some of the fastest treasure generating effects, and then your deck won't feel like it's ramping into huge bombs lightning fast. Now treasures, like I said, have a lot of support, so it's actually pretty easy to put together a synergistic deck that has power. I mean, there are card draw finishers and amplifiers baked into your theme. And even though this all comes with a big power increase, it does also make creating treasure decks very easy for new players. A lot of the most popular treasure token commanders either make treasures or use them, so they fit really well with random cards that just make treasures. I'll use Jolene Plunder Queen as an example. She makes treasures and amplifies them and gives you a benefit for having them. This is one of those themes where Wizards is throwing you a softball. Fill your deck with cards that just say treasure token on them and make Jolene unblockable, and that's basically it. You're kind of set. Additionally, since treasure tokens show up all the time, if you're a player who wants to constantly be upgrading and changing your deck, then treasure decks might be for you, since you will regularly have at least 1 or 2 new options for your list in most sets. Overall, I would recommend treasure decks for most players. If you want to build something artifact related or sacrificey aristocrats related, it's very easy as a new player, and although can be expensive if you really get into it, can be built on a budget as well. Treasure tokens are quite interesting. They are inherently really powerful. I mean, it makes a Lotus Petal, which is a strong card. And Wizards just went hog wild with them. I can't think of another mechanic that Wizards went all in on as much as they did with treasures. It was in so many sets across the whole color pie, everyone just got ramp and color fixing. And Wizards just made so much support for it. Alt, win cons, card draw, removal, ramp, commanders that reference it, everything you can imagine, there's a treasure version for. In such a short span of time too. I think it speaks to the current Wizards design philosophy where cards no longer have downsides or require as much work to build around. Instead, they just push upsides further and further to outdo previous cards. So it's not just a creature, your creature also ramps and color fixes. It's not just card draw, it's card draw that ramps and color fixes. Since, I guess, in theory, now everybody can make treasures, and not everybody gets to put lands into play. That's green only. Anyway, I hope you found this video about treasures interesting. Let me know what you think about treasure decks in the comments below. And if you have a treasure deck, tell me what it is. I'm super interested to hear about it. Thank you so very much for watching. Special thanks to my tier 3 patrons whose names you see here. If you want to be in the Patreon and join the Discord, check out the link below.